Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. I don't know if you can hear the rain outside behind me, but it's been quite an unusual spring for us here in Abilene. The first year I moved here in 2008, I think it rained 4 times the whole year. Typically here in Abilene, we also get our average rainfall within a couple of days, but it's been spread out a little bit over the spring, a lot more rain than we're used to, but we'll take it. Uh, you know, I've dealt with the pain of loss on numerous occasions. I cannot tell you how many funerals I've conducted. I cannot recall how many times I have visited with a grieving individual. But I can tell you that my eyes were opened in a way that they never have been before when I lost my mother. Suddenly the roles were reversed, and I was the grieving one. I had always been the one to provide comfort, but now I was being comforted. I had this idea that I would be strong, that I could handle it better than most because I had so much experience in this area. But oh, how wrong I was. God has taught me some valuable lessons through my loss. He has helped me gain greater insight into how I can be a better comforter. Empathy is about putting yourself in the other person's shoes. Well, empathy becomes a lot easier when you've actually been in the other person's shoes. If you have your Bibles, look with me at John chapter 11. Now, this, of course, is the account of Jesus raising his friend Lazarus from the dead. And this chapter contains, I think, many lessons on grieving. Through the example of Jesus, we learn how to help others manage their grief. And the first thing I want to point out to you is verse 35. Jesus wept. What a powerful expression. You ever thought about what this verse suggests? Two words that contain so much power. Jesus cried. In verse 33, it says that he was deeply moved in spirit and was troubled. So Jesus felt the need to be human in his emotions over the death of Lazarus. And so the first thing that we learn from Jesus about assisting others in their grief is to be real, be genuine. If the grieving person truly means something to us, then we will be moved with emotion over their loss. We shouldn't be ashamed to cry. Remember, we are to weep with those who weep. When grieving individuals see you as real and genuine, it makes an impact. People feel more comfortable to grieve in your presence. As a minister, I struggled with this at first. I felt like it was my duty to kind of be above the fray. I was supposed to be the rock that people could anchor to because I'm the preacher. And I soon learned that people don't need you to be a rock. They need you to be a pillow. They need a place to rest their head. They need a shoulder to cry on. They need someone who will show sorrow and compassion, someone who's human like them. That's what Jesus showed Mary and Martha. Verse 21 of John 11 says, Martha then said to Jesus, Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. You skip down to verse 32 and it says, therefore, when Mary came where Jesus was, she saw him and fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. It seems as though Martha and Mary are rebuking the Lord for not being there in their time of desperation. And isn't it interesting the way Jesus responds? He doesn't scold Martha. He doesn't try to intellectualize her feelings. He doesn't coach her up. He attempts to calm her by pointing out that he would raise her brother. When Mary confronts Jesus, our Lord refuses to say anything in response other than, where have you laid him? He saw her weeping. Now wasn't the time to get all theological or to set her thinking straight. It wouldn't have been right to say, dry those tears. Don't you know who I am? Why are you so worried? He might have been right in saying those things, but he didn't. He knew the anguish and pain that Lazarus' sisters were feeling. And telling them of his intentions would do no good. He was going to have to show them. So here again, we have another important lesson from Jesus when it comes to offering support to those who are grieving. Sometimes we just need to be quiet. Sometimes the best thing that we can say is nothing at all. Words don't always heal. Sometimes the best medicine is a warm embrace or just your presence. I'm sure it must have been some consolation to the sisters that Jesus was weeping as well. Verse 31 shows us another vital principle when it comes to helping the hurting. It reads, Then the Jews who were with her in the house and consoling her, when they saw that Mary got up quickly and went out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. The Jews had come to Mary and Martha's house. They came to console them. They came to show support. Now keep in mind that this was no gentle sobbing. The commonly held view at the time was that the more unrestrained the weeping, the more honor it paid to the dead. So this was unrestrained wailing and shrieking. Imagine walking up on such a scene. You could hear the loud cries from a distance. You come into the village and you see a crowd of people gathered around two of your friends. Everyone is overcome with emotion. Tears have flooded the ground. There's a community that has come together for the sole purpose of weeping with those who weep. The loss of Lazarus doesn't mean as much to the crowd as it does to Mary and Martha, but they still share in the sisters' grief. Comforting and consoling the grieving were an essential part of the Jewish religion, more essential than any other good work. But we don't need a book of laws or traditions like the Talmud to tell us that we should comfort the hurting. The church should be naturally supportive. We must have a tender heart of understanding. We should come with a heart of love and concern, not out of a sense of duty or obligation. But finally, I want you to go to John chapter 12 now, verses 1 and 2, where it reads, Jesus, therefore, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they made him supper there, and Martha was serving, but Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at the table. Jesus visits the home of Mary and Martha again. Why? Well, maybe I'm reaching a little bit here, but my guess is he wanted to check in on his friends. After a very traumatic time in their lives, even though Lazarus had been raised from the dead, Jesus wanted them to know that he was there for them. You know, so many folks make the mistake of forgetting about the bereaved after the funeral is over. The days following the burial are actually the most crucial because it is during this time that the initial shock has begun to wear off and the real pain of grief begins. So often when a loved one passes away, the grief is kind of suppressed because there's 1,000 decisions to make. You know, what are they going to wear? Got to pick out a casket. You got to pay thousands of dollars, and it can be quite overwhelming. But on the day of the funeral and after is when the real mourning and grieving begins so often. Just because the funeral is over doesn't mean that the grieving has stopped. In the days, weeks, and months following the funeral, the bereaved needs to hear that we are there for them. So, what we've said so far is be quiet, be genuine, and also be available. The hurting needs someone to ask them, how are you? Do you need anything? What can I do to help? I'm here for you. Helping one manage their grief extends far beyond the few days following the loss and leading up to the funeral. We need to be in it for the long haul. And one of the most essential tools for a comforter is a calendar. When a death occurs, enter that date on your calendar. When special days come around, like anniversaries or birthdays or holidays, call the one who is left to grieve and mourn. Tell them that you love them and that you're thinking about them. Send them a card. When the anniversary of their loved one's death rolls around, offer to visit with them or take them out to lunch. You know, our folks here at Oldham Lane are so good at this. We have so many here who are so thoughtful and caring, and I hope you have that at your church as well. You know, our folks reach out to those who are struggling with grief, and they do their best to pick them up. In fact, we have a grief support group here at Oldham Lane. Many of our members take part in and engage with people in our community at large. There are people all around us who are hurting. Some of them are not Christians. Some of them are Christians who have a hard time moving on. Many times they're looking for answers. They're looking for a friend. We can be that friend that they so desperately need. And understand that John's gospel was written for a Greek audience. So this snapshot of Jesus found in chapter 11 would have been quite staggering to them. You see, the Greeks believed that the primary characteristic of God was something they called apatheia, which means total inability to feel any emotion whatsoever. They argued that if we humans can feel sorrow or joy, gladness or grief, then it means that someone can have an effect upon us. And if a person can have an effect upon us, then it means that for the moment, that person has power over us. No one, of course, can have power over God, so this must mean that God is essentially incapable of feeling any emotion whatsoever. The Greeks believed in a God who was isolated and passionless or compassionless. So you can imagine their reaction when they heard or read the story of Jesus raising Lazarus. The entire episode turns their thinking upside down, and Jesus paints a picture of a very different God, one whose heart is overcome with anguish for his people. One of the greatest things Jesus did was bring us the good news of a God who cares. Douglas Maurer, 15, of Creve Coeur, Missouri, had been feeling bad for several days. His temperature was ranging between 103 and 105 degrees, and he was suffering from severe flu-like symptoms. Finally, his mother took him to the hospital in St. Louis. Douglas Maurer was diagnosed as having leukemia, and the doctors told him in very frank terms about his disease. They said that for the next 3 years, he would have to undergo intensive chemotherapy. They didn't sugarcoat the side effects. They told Douglas that he would go bald, that his body would most likely bloat. Upon learning this, he went into a deep depression. His aunt called a floral shop to send Douglas an arrangement of flowers, and she told the clerk that it was for her teenage nephew who has leukemia. And when the flowers arrived at the hospital, they were beautiful, and Douglas read the card from his aunt. Then he saw a second card, and it said, "Douglas, I took your order. I work at the florist. I had leukemia when I was 7 years old. I'm 22 years old now. Good luck. My heart goes out to you. Sincerely, Laura." Well, his face lit up. His spirits were lifted. It's funny, Douglas Maurer was in a hospital filled with millions of dollars of the most sophisticated medical equipment. He was being treated by expert doctors and nurses with medical training totaling in the hundreds of years. But it was a sales clerk in a flower shop, a woman earning minimum wage, who, by taking the time to care, gave Douglas hope and the will to carry on. If you have ever experienced grief, then you have a responsibility to comfort your brother or sister in their time of sorrow. Not only are we able to tap into the power of God during times of distress, but we should also be able to rely on our spiritual family for comfort. Let me remind you one more time of Paul's words in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 26. He writes, "And if one member suffers, all the members suffer with it. If one member is honored, all the members rejoice with it." That is what we are to be about. God, in His infinite wisdom and foreknowledge, knew that people need other people. The church functions, or at least it should, to comfort and support one another in both the triumphs and the trials of life. A Christian should never have to grieve alone. God is there. Brothers and sisters are there. We are not on an island. We are a part of the best social network to have ever been created, the church. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you have a